Dog won't stop barking at the football. Police arrive and what they find inside shocks the stadium. The sharp January wind whipped through the service corridors of Mercedes-Benz Stadium, carrying with it the electric anticipation of playoff football. Sarah Collins watched her breath form clouds in the cold air as Max, her Belgian Malinois partner, moved with practiced precision through their pre-game security sweep. The stadium stood largely empty, hours before 70,000 fans would pour in for the NFC divisional round. "Clear so far, Wheeler," she called into her radio, watching Max methodically work his way through the lower service level. 6 years of partnership had taught her to read every muscle twitch, every ear movement. Today, something felt different in his usual fluid routine. Marcus Wheeler's voice crackled back through her earpiece. "Copy that, Collins. How long until you reach the team areas?" As head of stadium security, Wheeler had been on edge all morning. The stakes were higher than usual. The Atlanta Falcons' first real shot at a championship run since their devastating Super Bowl loss in 2017. 20 minutes tops, Sarah responded, checking her watch. "Max is being extra thorough today." She didn't mention how her partner's attention had seemed to sharpen over the past few minutes, his usual sweeping pattern becoming more focused, more intent. The dog's sudden change in behavior cut through her thoughts like a knife. Max's body language shifted from routine inspection to alert status in a heartbeat. His nose twitched, head lowered, and his usual fluid movement became rigid, focused on something near the Falcons' locker room entrance. "What have you got, buddy?" Sarah's hand instinctively moved to rest on her service weapon, a habit born from countless operations where Max's instincts had saved lives. The dog's attention fixed on a seemingly innocuous NFL game ball lying against the wall. In their years together, they'd faced down armed suspects, uncovered drug operations, and prevented potential terror attacks. But something about this felt different. Max's behavior wasn't indicating explosives or narcotics. This was something new. Wheeler appeared at the end of the corridor with 2 of his staff, their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. "Everything clear for the sweep?" The question died in his throat as Max began barking, the sound reverberating through the empty space with an urgency Sarah hadn't heard in months. "Clear the corridor," Sarah ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned her reputation the hard way. "And get me EOD, now." She'd learned early in her career that second-guessing Max's instincts wasn't just foolish, it could be deadly. While they waited for the bomb squad, Sarah's mind raced through recent security briefings. The playoffs always brought increased threats, disgruntled fans, opportunity-seeking criminals, the occasional extremist. But Max's behavior didn't fit any of their usual threat profiles. The bomb squad arrived in full gear, their heavy boots echoing through the evacuated hallway. Sarah watched as they carefully x-rayed the ball, then began the delicate process of cutting it open. The lead technician's sharp intake of breath told her they'd found something. "Officer Collins, you're gonna want to see this." He held up what looked like a sophisticated circuit board, barely larger than a quarter. "It's not explosive, but it's definitely not regulation equipment either." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. A listening device, carefully concealed inside official NFL game equipment, positioned near the home team's locker room hours before a crucial playoff game. This wasn't random. This wasn't amateur hour. "Get me a secure line to the FBI field office," she instructed Wheeler, who'd gone pale. "And nobody touches anything else in this sector without K-9 clearance first." Max stood at attention, aware from Sarah's tone that their day had just become much longer. The next hour brought a flurry of activity. FBI agents arrived, tech specialists began scanning for transmission signals, and NFL security executives appeared, their faces tight with concern. Sarah watched as Max led a second sweep, this time with an expanded team following his every move. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Max's bark echoed again, this time from near the coaching staff's office area. Sarah was running before the sound fully registered. Her partner had found something else, and judging by his stance, it was similar to the first discovery. One ball could be written off as an isolated incident. Two made it a conspiracy. The FBI's lead agent, Special Agent Davidson, approached with a tablet displaying complex signal patterns. "Officer Collins, we've got multiple broadcasts, highly encrypted. Someone's been listening to everything happening in this stadium, and they're still listening now." Sarah nodded, processing the information while scratching Max's ears, a gesture as much for her comfort as his. "Then let's give them something to hear." She turned to Wheeler. "I want every security camera feed for the past week, and I want to know every person who had access to official game equipment." "Sarah," Wheeler started, his voice low, "this goes beyond game security. We're talking about the integrity of the entire league. If word gets out before kickoff, then we work fast," she cut him off. "Max and I have 4 hours to find every device and identify who planted them. After that, 70,000 fans and a national television audience will be watching every play." Max's ears perked up at a distant sound, and Sarah recognized the change in his posture immediately. He'd caught another scent, something that tied to their ongoing investigation. Without hesitation, she followed his lead toward the stadium's administrative section. The game clock was ticking, but this was one play that wouldn't be found in any team's playbook. And as Max led her deeper into the stadium's maze of corridors, Sarah knew they were about to uncover something that would change everything, not just for today's game, but for the entire NFL. Special Agent Davidson's tablet cast a blue glow across the security command center as she pulled up the transmission data. "These aren't amateur devices," she explained, pointing to complex waveform patterns. "Military-grade encryption, direct satellite uplink, and power cells that could last weeks." Sarah watched Max pace near the door, his attention still fixed on something beyond their current position. "Who has this kind of tech?" Wheeler asked, leaning over Sarah's shoulder to study the screen. 3 more doctored footballs had been discovered in the past hour, each strategically placed near crucial communication points throughout the stadium. "That's the wrong question," Sarah replied, scratching behind Max's ears as he returned to her side. "The real question is, who has both the tech and the access?" She pulled up the stadium's employee roster on a nearby monitor. "We need to cross-reference everyone who's had access to game equipment in the past week with security clearance for restricted areas." The FBI's technical team had confirmed these weren't off-the-shelf components. The listening devices showed signs of professional engineering, with custom-built circuitry that could tap into encrypted radio frequencies. Whoever was behind this had serious resources. Max's sudden bark cut through her sentence. Sarah turned to see Frank Morrison, the stadium's operations director, standing in the doorway. Something in Max's posture made her instantly alert. This wasn't his usual reaction to stadium personnel. The dog's muscles were tense, his attention laser-focused. "Sorry to interrupt," Morrison said smoothly, though Sarah noticed his eyes fixing briefly on the evidence bags containing the compromised footballs. "Wheeler, the NFL executive team is asking for an update. They're talking about delaying kickoff." Sarah caught a subtle shift in Morrison's stance when he mentioned the delay. 15 years of police work had taught her to read people, as well as Max read sense. Something was off. Morrison's careful composure seemed almost too perfect. "Sir," a young tech analyst interrupted, bursting into the room, "we've got something. The transmission logs show test signals going back 3 days, all during night shifts. The pattern matches maintenance schedules." Morrison's face remained perfectly composed, but Sarah saw his left hand twitch slightly. Max moved closer to him, nose working overtime, and the operations director took an instinctive step back. "Frank," Sarah said carefully, "would you mind telling me why my partner seems so interested in your shoes?" The room went quiet. Morrison glanced down at his standard-issue staff boots, then back up at Sarah. "Dogs aren't always right, Officer Collins, even the good ones." "Actually," Sarah replied, "Max has never been wrong, and those boots look fairly new. When did you get them?" "This morning," Morrison answered quickly. Too quickly. The words tumbled out with a rehearsed quality that set off more alarm bells in Sarah's mind. Sarah nodded to Davidson, who was already pulling up the security footage. Let's see what other areas of the stadium you might have visited in those new boots, especially around the equipment storage areas. Morrison's composure cracked for just a second, a slight tightening around the eyes, a barely perceptible shift in weight. But it was enough. Sarah had seen that look countless times, the moment a suspect realized they'd made a mistake. "If you'll excuse me," Morrison said, "I should really get back to—" Max moved before Morrison could finish his sentence, positioning himself between the operations director and the door. Sarah saw Morrison's hand drift toward his pocket. "I wouldn't," she warned, her own hand moving to her weapon. Max tends to take sudden movements personally. The dog's low growl emphasized her point. Davidson's voice cut through the tension. "Got it." Morrison accessed the equipment storage at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and 4:15 a.m. 3 nights in a row. The access logs show his master key card. "Standard inventory checks," Morrison offered, but sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. His eyes darted between the faces in the room, looking for an ally and finding none. "During the exact times our devices were signaling?" Sarah moved closer, noting how his eyes kept darting to the evidence bags. "That's quite a coincidence. Almost as interesting as a stadium operations director wearing brand new boots right after we found trace evidence near the first device." The next few seconds happened in a blur. Morrison lunged for the evidence bags, but Max was faster, catching the man's sleeve with practiced precision. Sarah had him pinned and cuffed before his desperate grab even completed its arc. "Frank Morrison!" Davidson stepped forward, badge out. "You're under arrest for federal crimes, including espionage and conspiracy to commit fraud." As they led Morrison out, Sarah found his phone. The last text message made her blood run cold. "Plans compromised. Initiate backup protocol." "Wheeler," she barked, "lock down all exits now and get me every security feed of Morrison's movements for the past week." She turned to Davidson. "This isn't over. Morrison's just one piece of a larger operation." Max's ears suddenly perked up, his head turning toward the stadium's east service corridor. A new scent, a new trail. Sarah had learned to trust these subtle cues. They'd kept them both alive more than once. Sarah checked her watch. 2 hours until kickoff. Somewhere in this massive structure, Morrison's partners were executing their backup plan, and judging by Max's growing agitation, they were on the move. "Ready to hunt, partner?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Max's intense focus was all she needed to see. Together, they moved toward the east corridor, leaving behind the bustling command center for the quiet service tunnels where their real work would begin. The playoffs were supposed to be about the game on the field, but today, the most important plays were happening in the shadows, and as Sarah followed Max deeper into the stadium's maze of corridors, she knew they were running out of time to stop whatever Morrison and his conspirators had set in motion. Sarah's boots echoed through the east service corridor as she followed Max's lead. The sound brought back memories of another case, 3 years ago, when everything had unraveled. Back then, she'd also been following her partner's instincts, tracking a different scent that led straight to the top of the NFL's power structure. "What's the connection?" Davidson asked, keeping pace. "Morrison's a stadium operations director making 6 figures. Why risk everything?" Sarah's mind flashed to the case file that still sat in her desk drawer at home. "Sometimes it's not about the money." She watched Max pause at an intersection, nose working methodically. 3 years ago, I investigated a series of suspicious games, point spreads that didn't make sense, last-minute personnel changes, equipment malfunctions at crucial moments. Max chose the right corridor, his pace quickening. Sarah recognized this behavior. He was onto something solid. After 6 years together, she could read his shifting posture like a book, the slight forward tilt of his ears, the tension in his shoulders. He'd caught a familiar scent. "I remember that case," Wheeler said, slightly winded from keeping up. "It got shut down suddenly. Internal affairs got involved. Because I started asking questions about Thomas Reeves." Sarah's jaw tightened at the name. NFL senior executive, former team owner. The evidence pointed straight to his office, but suddenly the investigation was killed. I got suspended for overstepping protocols. The memory still stung. 6 weeks of administrative leave, her career hanging by a thread. Max had been the only constant, staying with her through those dark weeks. His unwavering trust, a reminder of why she'd become a cop in the first place. Max stopped abruptly, nose twitching at a maintenance door. Sarah tested the handle. Locked. But Max's behavior told her everything she needed to know. His tail was straight, body rigid with alertness. Whatever was behind this door was important. "Davidson," she called. "We need this door open, now." While they waited for the locksmith, Sarah pulled up Morrison's personnel file on her phone. "Look at this. He was hired 15 years ago, when the stadium was built. Guess who was on the hiring committee?" "Reeves?" Davidson asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Along with 3 other executives who were later investigated for gambling connections." Sarah scrolled through the documents. All those investigations got shut down too. Different jurisdictions, different years, same pattern. Someone always stepped in at the last minute, made the evidence disappear. The locksmith arrived, tools in hand. As he worked on the door, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from the tech team. "Signal analysis complete. Broadcasts match previous pattern from 2021 investigation." Sarah's heart raced. The same pattern from her old case. The one that had nearly destroyed her career. She'd been right all along. This went beyond one game, beyond one stadium. It was systematic, organized, and carefully orchestrated from the highest levels. The door clicked open, revealing a small office filled with maintenance equipment. But Max ignored the tools, heading straight for a locked cabinet in the corner. Sarah recognized the brand. High-end, secure storage, the kind used for sensitive electronics. The same type she'd found during her previous investigation, before everything went sideways. "Get it open," she ordered. While the locksmith worked on the cabinet, Sarah examined the room. Everything seemed standard issue except for a framed photo on the desk. Morrison, with a group of men at a golf course. Her blood ran cold as she recognized one face. "Thomas Reeves," she muttered, pointing to the photo. This was taken last month at his private club. She'd memorized his face during her previous investigation, spent countless hours trying to prove his connection. Now here he was, smiling next to their prime suspect. Max whined softly, pressing against her leg. He always seemed to know when she was wrestling with old demons. Sarah scratched behind his ears, drawing strength from his presence. "I know, buddy. This time we'll get it right." The cabinet lock finally yielded. Inside, they found exactly what Sarah had expected. More listening devices, identical to those in the footballs, along with detailed schedules of NFL games going back 3 seasons. Each page was marked with betting odds, point spreads, and cryptic annotations. "Sarah," Davidson called from the desk where she'd booted up the computer, "you need to see this." She pulled up an email chain between Morrison and several unnamed accounts. The subject line read, "Weekly Override Protocol." When as Sarah read through the emails, the full scope became clear. This wasn't just about today's game. It was a systematic operation, targeting key matches, manipulating everything from field equipment to communication systems. The dollar amounts mentioned made her dizzy. Millions moving through offshore accounts. Max's sudden growl pulled her attention to the door. Wheeler stood there, his face ashen. "Sarah, NFL security just found something in the coach's booth. Thomas Reeves was here this morning. Unscheduled visit, no security check-in." Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. "He's not just involved, he's here. Today." She turned to Davidson. "How fast can we get a warrant? For this evidence? 10 minutes. Davidson was already on her phone. "Make it 5. Sarah checked her watch. The game would start in 90 minutes, and somewhere in this stadium, the man who'd nearly ended her career was orchestrating his biggest play yet. "Max and I have a reunion to attend." As they moved to leave, Sarah paused at the photo. 3 years of doubt and damaged reputation, all because she dared to question the wrong powerful man. But now, with Max at her side and federal agents backing her play, she finally had her chance to finish what she'd started. Max's tail wagged once, his eyes fixed on hers with complete trust. They'd been through hell together, and they'd come out stronger. Now it was time to close the biggest case of their careers. "Let's go find Reeves, partner." Sarah squared her shoulders, ready for whatever came next. "We've got a game to save. He's moving." Agent Davidson's voice crackled through Sarah's earpiece as she and Max navigated the stadium's lower concourse. Security cameras picked up Reeves heading toward the broadcast level. Sarah quickened her pace, Max matching her stride for stride. The German shepherd's ears were pricked forward, his movements precise and silent. Against protocol, she'd refused to wait for SWAT backup. With less than an hour until kickoff, they couldn't risk Reeves slipping away. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Inside, Sarah caught her reflection in the polished steel walls. Her tactical vest felt heavier than usual, the weight of 3 years' worth of vindication pressing down on her shoulders. Max's sudden alertness drew her attention. His nose twitched, and Sarah caught it too, a faint trace of expensive cologne lingering in the elevator car. Reeves had been here recently. "Davidson, check the broadcast booth schematics. Look for alternate exits." "Already on it. There's a maintenance catwalk that connects to the north stairwell. Could be an escape route." The elevator stopped at the broadcast level. Sarah took a deep breath, her hand resting on her sidearm. Max moved slightly ahead, his posture shifting into full tactical mode. They emerged into a curved corridor lined with broadcast equipment. Ahead, a cluster of technicians huddled around a monitor, their worried whispers carrying through the space. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, approaching the group. One of the techs looked up, his face pale. "The main communication relay. It's not responding to commands. Someone's locked us out of our own system." Sarah's blood ran cold. If they couldn't restore the systems, the game would have to be delayed or cancelled. The economic impact would be catastrophic unless someone had bet heavily on exactly that outcome. "Where's the primary control room?" The tech pointed down the corridor. "End of the hall, but Mr. Reeves is already there with his team. Said they'd handle it." "Of course he did," Sarah muttered. She keyed her radio. "Davidson, send backup to the broadcast level. And get me override codes for the control room door." Max's growl came a split second before Sarah heard footsteps behind them. She turned to see 2 men in dark suits, their stances screaming private security. "This area is restricted," one of them said, his hand conspicuously resting near his concealed weapon. Sarah displayed her badge. "Federal investigation. Step aside." The larger guard stepped forward. "Our orders come from Mr. Reeves himself." "No one enters without—" Max's bark cut through the tension, sharp and commanding. Both guards instinctively stepped back, creating just enough space for Sarah to spot movement through the glass panel behind them. Reeves, directing someone to work on the main console. "Last warning," Sarah said, her voice steel. "Move, or my partner here makes his own path." Before they could decide, Davidson's voice came through Sarah's earpiece. "Sarah, the system logs. They're showing a massive data upload. Someone's transferring complete control of the stadium's communications to an external server." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't about delaying one game. With control of the stadium's systems, they could manipulate any number of outcomes, from play calls to scoreboard displays. The betting implications were staggering. Sarah didn't wait for the guards to make their decision. She gave Max the command they'd practiced countless times. "Clear." The shepherd launched forward, not attacking but using his presence to force the guards apart. Sarah slipped through the gap, shouldering open the control room door. Reeves stood at the center console, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the technical equipment surrounding him. He barely glanced up at Sarah's entrance. "Officer Collins," he said smoothly. "Still charging at shadows, I see." "Step away from the console," Sarah ordered, her weapon drawn. Max flanked her, his focus locked on Reeves. "You know what your problem was 3 years ago?" Reeves continued as if she hadn't spoken. "You thought too small, couldn't see the bigger picture. He gestured to the screens around him. This is the future of sports entertainment. Controlled outcomes, guaranteed returns. Federal agents are on their way, Sarah replied. This time you're not walking away. Reeves smiled, reaching slowly into his jacket. Sarah tensed, but he withdrew only a small remote. That's where you're wrong, Officer Collins. I'm not just walking away. His thumb moved toward a button. I'm taking the whole system down with me. Max reacted before Sarah could process the movement, launching himself at Reeves's arm. The remote clattered to the floor as Sarah rushed forward, driving Reeves into the console. The sound of running feet filled the corridor outside. Sarah kept Reeves pinned as federal agents flooded the room, securing both the suspect and the evidence. "The system!" Sarah called out. "Lock it down!" Davidson appeared at the main terminal. "Upload stopped. We've got full logs of the transfer attempt. It's over." Sarah pulled Reeves upright as agents cuffed him. "Thomas Reeves, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted sabotage of a federal investigation." Reeves maintained his composure, but Sarah saw the flash of genuine fear in his eyes as he glanced at the evidence being collected. His empire was crumbling, and this time there would be no one to bail him out. Max padded over, pressing against Sarah's leg in their familiar gesture of solidarity. She scratched his ears, feeling the adrenaline slowly ebb. "Officer Collins," Reeves called as agents led him toward the door. "You have no idea what you've done. The people behind this, save it for the FBI." Sarah cut him off. She turned to Davidson. "Get a forensics team up here. I want every byte of data from these systems." Her phone buzzed. A message from Wheeler. "Field communications restored. Game can proceed on schedule." Sarah looked down at Max, who wagged his tail once. Mission accomplished. But something in Reeves's final warning nagged at her. He'd said, "people behind this," plural, which meant there were still threads to pull. She checked her watch. 30 minutes until kickoff. They'd stopped the immediate threat, but Sarah knew from experience that cases like this were rarely this clean. The stadium's service tunnels echoed with urgent radio chatter as Sarah and Max led the sweep team through the lower levels. Reeves's cryptic warning about people behind this had triggered an immediate security protocol. With kickoff approaching and 70,000 fans filing into their seats, they couldn't risk any surprises. "Davidson, what's the status on those system logs?" Sarah spoke into her radio, watching Max work his way methodically along the corridor. The shepherd's behavior was different now, more focused, more urgent. "You need to see this," Davidson's voice crackled back. The upload Reeves attempted, it wasn't going to an external server. It was meant for somewhere inside the stadium. Sarah stopped. "Inside? Where?" "Working on it, but there's more. We found encrypted communications between Reeves and someone using the handle Kingmaker. They were active right up until we made the arrest." Max suddenly froze, his ears forward. Sarah had learned to read these subtle shifts in his posture. Something was wrong. She held up her fist, signaling the team behind her to halt. The tunnel ahead split into 3 branches. Standard procedure would be to split the team, but Sarah's instincts, honed by years of working with Max, told her otherwise. Her partner's attention was fixed solely on the right passage. "This way," she whispered, following Max's lead. The tunnel sloped downward, leading to areas that weren't on any official stadium blueprint she'd seen. Her radio crackled. "Sarah," Davidson's voice was urgent now. "We decoded more of the messages. Reeves wasn't the mastermind, he was the distraction. Whatever they're planning, it's happening now." The tunnel opened into a large mechanical room filled with humming equipment. Industrial-grade cables snaked across the ceiling, feeding into a sophisticated array of servers and monitoring equipment. This wasn't standard stadium infrastructure. "Davidson, are you seeing this?" Sarah activated her body camera. "They've built some kind of shadow control center down here." "Copy that." "Sarah, those servers, they're patched directly into the stadium's main power grid. They could black out the entire facility." Max's growl cut through the tension. Sarah spun around to see a figure emerging from behind a server bank. James Wheeler, head of stadium security. "I was wondering when you'd find this place," Wheeler said, his familiar face now strange in the blue glow of the monitors. Though I have to admit, I didn't expect it quite so soon. Sarah's mind raced through the evidence. Wheeler's convenient timing throughout the day, his access to every secure area, his position to oversee all security protocols. Your kingmaker. Wheeler smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Reeves was right about one thing. This is the future of sports entertainment. Do you have any idea how much money moves through this stadium on game day? The real money isn't in touchdown passes or field goals. It's in controlling every aspect of the experience. By rigging the games, Sarah said, her hand moving slowly toward her weapon. How long have you been running this operation? Long enough to know you won't shoot me. Wheeler's hand moved to a console. Not when I can shut down every exit in this stadium with a single command. 70,000 people, Officer Collins. That's quite a responsibility. Max tensed beside Sarah, reading her subtle shifts in posture. They'd been in situations like this before, standoffs where the wrong move could cost lives. You were the one who shut down my investigation 3 years ago, Sarah said, the pieces finally fitting together. You made sure Reeves took the fall, kept yourself clean. I did what was necessary, just like now. Wheeler's fingers hovered over the controls. Walk away, Sarah. Take your dog and walk away. Some games are too big to stop. Sarah felt Max's presence at her side, solid and unwavering. In 6 years of partnership, they developed a language of their own, an understanding that went beyond commands and training. You're right about one thing, Sarah said, shifting her weight slightly. This is about responsibility. She gave the command in a whisper. Take it. Max launched forward with explosive speed, not at Wheeler, but at the power cable he'd failed to notice by his feet. The Shepherd's jaws closed on the industrial cord, yanking it free from the server bank. The room plunged into darkness for 2 seconds before emergency lights kicked in. Wheeler lunged for a backup switch, but Sarah was already moving. Years of training with Max had taught her to act in perfect synchronization. She tackled Wheeler as he reached the console, driving him away from the controls. He was larger, but Sarah had fury and justice on her side. They crashed into a server rack, sending equipment clattering to the floor. Wheeler managed to land a solid hit to her ribs, but Max was there instantly, clamping down on his sleeve, immobilizing his arm. Sarah used the opening to pin him, securing the cuffs with practiced efficiency. James Wheeler, she said, slightly out of breath, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and about a dozen federal violations we'll sort out later. The backup team burst in, securing the scene. Davidson's voice came through the radio. Power grid stable, all exits operational. Whatever he was planning, it's shut down. Sarah pulled Wheeler to his feet as FBI agents began documenting the hidden control center. You know what your mistake was, she asked him. You thought technology could control everything, but you forgot about old-school police work and a dog who can smell a lie. Max padded over, tail slightly wagging now that the threat was neutralized. Sarah scratched his ears, feeling the familiar surge of pride in their partnership. Wheeler said nothing as he was led away, but his face showed what Sarah had seen in so many corrupt power players. The shock of discovering they weren't as untouchable as they'd believed. All units, scene secure, Sarah reported. Game can proceed as scheduled. She looked down at Max, who gazed back with complete trust. Together, they'd unraveled not just a game day conspiracy, but a years-long operation that had corrupted the sport at its highest levels. Above them, the crowd roared as the teams took the field. Sarah smiled. For once, they could be sure it would be a fair game. Come on, partner, she said to Max. Let's go watch some honest football. 3 weeks after the playoff game, Sarah stood in front of the federal courthouse, adjusting Max's service vest. Camera crews gathered on the steps, waiting for the sentencing. The case had exploded into what sports media was calling the biggest corruption scandal in NFL history. Ready for this, partner? She asked, smoothing down a wrinkle in his tactical harness. Max's tail wagged once, his way of saying he was always ready. 6 years of partnership had taught her to read every subtle signal. Agent Davidson approached, tablet in hand. Final numbers are in. The operation stretched back 7 years, involved 12 stadiums, and moved over 300 million in illegal bets. She shook her head. Wheeler and Reeves were just the beginning. Their servers led us to 3 team owners, 4 referees, and a network of professional gamblers across 6 states. Sarah nodded, remembering the evidence they'd uncovered in that hidden control room. The servers had contained years of data, rigged games, manipulated broadcasts, compromised officials. The conspiracy reached into every level of professional football, corrupting the sport from the inside out. Officer Collins, a young FBI tech, hurried over. "They're ready for you inside, and the commissioner wants a word first." Sarah turned to find NFL Commissioner Michael Parker waiting by the courthouse doors. His normally composed face showed the strain of the past weeks, his reputation and the league's integrity hanging by a thread. "Officer Collins," he said, extending his hand, "I wanted to thank you personally before the sentencing. What you and Max uncovered." He paused, looking at the shepherd with respect. "You've helped us save the game itself. The reforms we're implementing will change professional football forever." "Just doing our job, sir." Sarah kept her voice professional, but she felt Max press against her leg, his way of sharing their private victory. Inside the courtroom, Wheeler and Reeves sat with their legal teams. They'd both taken plea deals, agreeing to testify against their larger network of conspirators. The evidence Sarah and Max had discovered in the stadium had left them no choice. The remote control device alone carried enough federal charges to put them away for decades. Sarah studied their faces as the proceedings began. Wheeler maintained his stern security chief demeanor, but his eyes betrayed his defeat. Reeves, on the other hand, seemed almost relieved, as if surrender had lifted a weight from his shoulders. As the judge read out the sentences, 15 years for Wheeler, 12 for Reeves, plus millions in fines, Sarah thought about that day in the stadium. One bark from Max at a suspicious football had unraveled an empire of corruption. Her partner's instincts had accomplished what years of traditional investigations couldn't. The judge's voice carried authority as she detailed the extent of their crimes. "This court views the systematic corruption of professional sports as a betrayal of public trust. Your actions undermined not just a game, but the faith of millions of fans." As federal marshals led the defendants away, Wheeler caught Sarah's eye. For a moment, she saw the flicker of something like respect before he disappeared through the secure door. His final glance seemed to acknowledge what she'd known all along, that justice eventually catches up. Outside, Commissioner Parker addressed the media. "Today marks a new chapter for the NFL. We're implementing enhanced security protocols across all stadiums, including expanded K9 units modeled after Officer Collins and Max's program. Every game will now undergo rigorous integrity checks." Sarah guided Max around to the quiet side of the courthouse, avoiding the press. She'd never been comfortable with publicity. For her, the real satisfaction came from the work itself, from the partnership that had never failed her. Her phone buzzed. A message from Davidson. "Task force assignment approved. You and Max start Monday. Full team briefing at 0900. Sarah smiled, crouching down to Max's level. The FBI's new Sports Integrity Task Force had been formed in response to their case, designed to prevent similar conspiracies across all professional sports. She and Max would be leading the K9 division, training new handlers and dogs to detect not just traditional threats, but the subtle signs of corruption. "Looks like we've got a new assignment, buddy." She ruffled his ears, earning a happy tail wag. "Think you're up for teaching some new dogs your tricks?" Max's alert posture was all the answer she needed. They'd been through hell together, faced down corruption at the highest levels, and emerged stronger. Their methods had been proven, their instincts validated. Whatever came next, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything, as partners. The task force would be different from their usual work. Instead of patrolling one stadium, they'd be developing programs for venues across the country. Max's keen nose and Sarah's investigative skills would help shape a new generation of K9 units specifically trained to protect the integrity of professional sports. A soft spring breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut grass from the nearby park. Somewhere in the city, another case waited to be solved, another wrong to be righted. But for now, Sarah was content to share this moment of triumph with her most trusted friend. "Come on, partner," she said, starting down the courthouse steps. "I think you've earned a stop at that food truck you like." Max fell into step beside her, matching her stride for stride, just as he had that day in the stadium. Behind them, the media frenzy continued, but Sarah didn't look back. She and Max had done what they'd set out to do. They'd served justice and protected the game. After all, they were more than just a K9 unit now. They were proof that sometimes all it takes to change the world is one dedicated officer and a dog who wouldn't stop barking at a football.